weapon will prosper. No enemy triumph. He will not overcome. He can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win. Hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time. Not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place. As I wait, I will keep the faith. 'Cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I will run the race, I will fight the fight, and I will keep the faith. I keep my eyes fixed on you.
Hello there, welcome to New Prayer Watch. This is Jacob coming to you from Osaka, Japan. I have a very special edition of New Prayer Watch, the Friday New Prayer Watch show that I do. Pastor Tim has come all the way over from doing ministry in Hawaii and as well as obviously in America. He's come here to visit us here in Japan. We're doing some other things here on the side. One of them is this weekly broadcast here. So Pastor Tim, thank you for coming. He's actually, I'm looking at you, but he's over here in the studio, if you want to call it that. Here, Pastor Tim, thank you for coming all the way out here.
Well, I was glad to be with you, Jacob, and we're here with his wife, Sachio, and our new grandbaby, their child, Ori. She was born almost 4 weeks ago, and we're excited to be with her and with them and just reconnecting with what we're doing here in Asia. For those of you that follow our ministry, Christian Center Shreveport, we remind you that God gave us a word a couple years ago that God was really releasing us to Asia, the eastern part of the world, and the reasons why, because this is going to be one of the great last moves of God. And Jacob had already been here. Obviously, we were planting them as our base here in Asia, out of Japan, here in Osaka. So we're glad for that. Our goal is to build a ministry training center here where we can train workers to really go out into Asia, equip them with the DNA that God's given us, but also learning from them on how to walk in the Asian culture, how to minister in the Asian culture. And I think for me, I know it's going to be kind of an interview. We'll probably interview each other back and forth. But I'd like Jacob to share with you what brought him here, number one, prophetically, and then what he's learned differently from the Western ministry versus the Eastern type ministry, because it is vastly different. And I think for you, if you're praying with us and supporting us, which you are, that's why you're watching today, I think it's very important. I want you to be a part of this. I want you to partner with us. Many of you sown to this ministry and sown to the work in Asia as well, and we want to honor it. If you feel passionate about that, at the end of this session today, we'll give you ways that you can sow into that. But Jacob, why don't you share a little bit with the people how you came into, I know the story, but they may not know the story, what led you to be here, and then let's talk about the differences in the types of ministry.
Okay, where to begin? You know, it's a really long, very complicated, very cool story with lots of confirmations along the way, going all the way back to when I was, 11 or whatever. But really the key moment was when I was 17, and I was actually in Israel at the time. It was the second time I went, and I we always go those of you that have been on a tour with us to Israel, we went to Caesarea, and there's Caiaphas's house. Cornelius's house. I always get Caiaphas and Cornelius mixed up. Cornelius's house, which of course, if you're familiar with his story in Acts 10, that is when Peter, he gets a vision in Jaffa, and then he has to go up and minister to Cornelius. And so I was there, and I had this kind of I don't know if you want to call it an encounter, but I felt the Lord strongly tell me, you're going to go to Japan. And I was 17 years old at the time. And I didn't actually receive it either, but I felt the Lord tell me that, and I kind of was like, I had, a plan of what I wanted to do with my life. I was about to graduate high school and do a bunch of, my career and everything, college and all that sort of stuff. And so, but it was in the back of my mind, the Lord told me to go to Japan at this point in time. But he also said another thing, you need to go to university and get a 4-year degree, a bachelor's degree, which I did after graduating. And during those 4 years when I was studying for my bachelor's, which had nothing to do with necessarily coming to Japan, I kind of forgot about what the Lord told me to do until 4 years later when I was about to graduate. What am I going to do with my life, kind of thing. And I remembered the word that the Lord had given me about coming to this nation. And that is when, I shared a few weeks ago this word, but that is when, right as I was about to graduate university, Apostle Chuck Pierce, came to our church randomly on a Wednesday night. It wasn't like a conference or anything. He just, he comes and goes how he pleases, basically. And I knew, and that day was my birthday, right? And I knew that he was going to have something for me. I don't know what it was, but I knew it was a pivotal time in my life. I knew I was going to get something from that. And it's one of the most watched YouTube videos on our channel, even to this day, 14 years later or whatever. But he prophesied to not just like to me or to people, he prophesied not just to our house, but to our region, North Louisiana, and how there will be a connection between North Louisiana and it will go westward, which is interesting because I was thinking about this the other day. Pastor Tim is doing a lot of ministry in California and Oregon and Hawaii, which he didn't do 10 years ago, I believe.
That's right.
And he said the ministry would go westward and it will go all the way to Tokyo. And then, from Tokyo, it will go further out. But that was the first stop. So that was a confirmation to me that he said that. But what was interesting is I ended up not actually living in Tokyo. And the first time I went to Japan, when I bought my flights to come here, I was not scheduled to go to Tokyo. I was supposed to go to another city, but because of plane delays and all this sort of stuff, I ended up going there anyway. So that was another confirmation.
Yes.
And then one of the final confirmations for this is, many, many, many years later after that encounter I had when I was 17 years old in Caesarea, the church that I initially worked with in Japan, I came here after all of the delays and I pushed stuff back 6 months and then I went a week early, all these sorts of delays. You can't make this up. This is statistically impossible. But the church that I had originally volunteered at, the very first sermon that I heard in Japan in a church was on Acts chapter 10. And I was like, I know that story. That's a really important story to me, kind of freaking out. And so that was yet another one of the many confirmations here. And, when I came to this nation, I didn't really know anybody. I didn't know what I was going to do. But I did know that I needed to learn the language. And so I studied Japanese for 2 years. And at the end, this is another testimony in and of itself, which I've shared on here before, but at the end of that first 2-year cycle, I didn't have any open doors. I didn't know what I needed to do, where to go, and I had I don't know what you call it, a wrestling match almost with God. I was like, God, I need you to come through for me. You brought me out here. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. But I said, if this is it, if for whatever reason, the 2 years I studied Japanese and a little bit I volunteered at this one church is enough, and you want me to go back to America, I'll do that. But if you have more for me, I'm here, but I need you to open a door for me. And then it was at the end of 2013, and it was the first week of December of 2013, and I was scheduled to go back to Louisiana to visit for the holidays, and I asked God, I didn't ask God, I was like, God, you have to decide my path here by the end of the year. The next week, I got an email from a ministry here in Osaka, which I'd always felt called to. I wasn't living here at the time, but I always had felt called to Osaka long before I ever came here. And I got that email, and then without even seeing me or talking to me through email, sending back and forth, I told them, what I was doing and all this sort of stuff. They hired me a week later, and then the following week, I had all my visa stuff set up, and my path was decided before the end of the year. And so that was, another God coming through for me moment. And so I moved here to Osaka, and I worked here for 10 years as a teacher. But now, as most of you might know, as Pastor Tim just said, we're starting our base, our work here in Asia. And so I've shifted into that full time, basically. My wife and I have. And so that's what we're doing here today.
Well, and to me, we just did a session with another church. Sachio's father pastors a church, another prefecture called Kagawa, and we talked about 1 Timothy 1:18 about how Paul he commanded Timothy to follow the prophecies over his life and to fight the good fight in faith. And he went on to say that those that don't fight in faith become shipwrecked almost and don't walk in their purpose. And one thing Jacob's story should encourage you and all of us is he followed the path of the prophetic, what God had for him, but he had to fight a good fight. It wasn't enough just to have prophetic. You have to keep speaking it. You have to keep going after it. You have to keep sowing into it, regardless of what the natural was. I know at one time he had to come home for visa issues, and I know it was a difficult time for him because he was lost. Because when you're not where you're supposed to be, there is a part of your journey that becomes very difficult. And the wilderness season is not a bad season because it causes you to go deeper. And he pressed into that, and God brought him back in the right timing. And it was the warring with the words that were over his life. And Chuck also, we took Jacob to a conference over at Gloria Zion and had Chuck pray over him. And he prophesied to him again, the different nations in Asia. If you remember that, Jacob, I don't know if you remember that, I do. He started naming other nations and other places he would be a part of. And for me, in our ministry, I was excited for Jacob because at age 5, I turned him over to the Lord, and I said, Lord, I surrender him to the nations. I actually was at a conference where David Walters, a children's minister, had called us. He said to seek the Lord. If you got a firstborn child, surrender him to the nations, which I did. And so this was a fulfillment of a life's journey here for him and for us. But I was excited for that because I knew he was walking in his mandate. I never, in a sense, foresaw us shifting to Asia. My work has been in Europe and Africa, South and Central America, India. We've been in most of the we call the Western world, if you want to call it that. And Asia was not quote on my radar. I'm open to the nations always. And then prophecies came to our house. Two well vetted prophetic people gave us words, and it was interesting because once the words came in, they sowed a purpose in me. And I want to encourage you, when you get words like that, that's what it does for you. It sows a purpose in you. And I took it as a command, not as an option. And I think when you get prophetic words, they must be commands from the Lord. So we begin to sow. And our sowing, you are helping. I want to remind you that. You watching today is part of that journey. And to sow into this, and we're doing that now. We're coming at least once a year here. This will be our second time this year here. But we are going to put our feet on the soil. We're sowing with our finances. We're sowing buying plane tickets and spending money in the land. That sounds like, well, that's just the cost of travel. It's not true. You're sowing a seed into the land. I always tell people when you journey, don't look at it as, oh, it's costing me a lot of money. Look at it as a seed. And as you sow into the land, what happens is you reap a harvest in the land as well. And that's what we're doing right now. So his journey, why don't you go back, Jacob, a little bit about when Chuck Pierce prophesied over you personally at that conference. What did that do to you? And talk to us about how that even sowed you even deeper into the purpose here.
Yeah, so it's been a little, I go back and often listen to that word from time to time, but one of the most interesting things about that particular word was I moved here in 2011. And over the 2 years that I was studying Japanese, it's crazy because it was like every time I went back and listened to that word, because I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know anybody, I had a lot of instability in my life, and so I kept going back to that word to kind of help ground myself, make sure I was going in the right direction. or whatever. But it was like every time I listened to that word that he gave me, some part of it, he says many different things, some part of it had become reality. And one of the biggest things that he said, had no idea what I was going to do, going to Japan. This is the Lord. He said, of course, you're going to go to 10 other nations from Japan, and which I have gone to a couple since I've been here. But one of the things he said was that the ground under your feet will be unstable. He talked about moving from place to place to place, and he said that, but know that I'm with you, that I will bring the stability to you in the midst of that unstableness. And little did he know, and I didn't even plan this at the time, but when I moved to Japan, for the first 2 years, I moved 9 times. And so I was always in this state of like, because what I did was at the language school I went to, I stayed in homestays. So I'd stay with this family for 2 months, this family for 5 months, this family for 3 months. So I was constantly moving. I was even homeless for 2 months. I slept in my part-time job's room. The guy was like, "Here, you can just pay me $100 and you can stay here." So I didn't actually have a home for 2 months, but that was an interesting experience. Actually, it was kind of fun. But anyway, after I was in the state and I was feeling like very unstable, but I listened to that word and Apostle Chuck said that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that literally is happening. I feel like I'm about to, I can never settle down. I always had to get myself and move to a different place. But that word really, ministered to me, and it brought shalom to me and allowed me to, keep focused and keep, going forward with what I needed to do. And I need to go back and listen to it again, honestly, and see if anything else has changed. But that was one of the big impacts of that particular word. But I've always had a heart for the nations. And, one of the interesting things about Japan is it's the most, I would say, the wealthiest nation in this part of the world. And so you get a lot of people from different countries here that you don't usually encounter in other parts of the world, like in America. And everybody, if you go to, especially a big city, you'll encounter everybody in, America or whatever. But here it's particular people. So of course, Chinese people, Korean people, Filipinos, Thai, people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Indonesia, India. That's the main core group here. I mean, there's Indonesians and Malaysians all around this building where I live here right now. There's an Indian company down the street. And so you have an opportunity to interact with a large group of people from different nations here. You don't have to go to their nations. This nation is a lot easier access for Americans politically and in terms of security and all that kind of stuff. And so, and I have been in churches with people where like you encounter saints from those nations and you can bless them. And even though you might not ever go to their nation, which we might one day, we never know, but you can bless them and you can send them back to their nations. And so it's like a different core group of people that you encounter here. And so I always tell people that Japan is an apostolic nation. You can see evidence of this if you study what happened during World War II. That was a big perversion of their destiny. And they're still grappling with how to be like a leader, but at the same time, not dealing with the wounds and the bad blood between other nations of the past. And I believe only the church can help facilitate that, and only the kingdom can help facilitate that healing and allow more peace to come to this part of the world. But when revival happens in this part of the world, Japan is going to be key.
Yes. And
a lot of I don't want to criticize other nations because it's everyone will tell you it's so hard to be a missionary here in Japan, and that's a very long conversation I can have with you about why that is and the mindset around that, and how the mindset that most people have leads to a lack of progress here. But basically, I don't see revival happening in this part of Japan until the church in Japan arises and takes its place and plays its part here. And so we're, as far as us from Christian Center Shreveport, we have mind to go to many different nations in this area. But at the same time, this is our key hub. This is our launching pad. This is the crux of it all. both from a spiritual perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective, from an economic perspective. Japan is very key.
Well, I want to add that Chuck Pierce, when his word, like you said, it's one of our most watched videos that we have on our YouTube page. But his word was Tokyo was the start, and Japan was the starting. And you know, when Jesus said to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts, there's patterns, there's steps that are ordered, and when you follow the commands of the Lord, you can't get out of sequence. And I think for us, staying in sequence here is very important. What good would it be just to come here, okay, we landed here, and then start going to China or go to Indonesia? I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things, but the fact is you must sow where he first starts you and plants you. You know, Jesus said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you. So there's a passion here for us to gather the Japanese as well. To me, when I come here, it's very similar to Germany because if you watch the war, we talked about this before, you know, they were trying to take the nations for evil at that time, but they were to me, perverting the prophetic call or the what I call the apostolic call of these nations. Japan and Germany are probably two of the most powerful nations in the earth as far as being apostolic. Mm-hmm. I know America is too, but these two nations are, and I'm always, when I minister, I'll be going to Germany next month, we do the same thing. We pour into them. And for me, a confirmation as well. I was in Germany last year, and I was leaving the airport, exchanging my euro back to US dollar, and the lady exchanging my money was Chinese. I didn't know. I knew she looked Asian. And I was talking to her. I said, where are you from? And she says she's from Shanghai. And I said, well, that's beautiful. I heard that's a beautiful city. And she said, where are you from? I told her, America, you know, so forth. And she says, and she just looked at me as weird. We were having to wait because she didn't have enough money in her till. She had to wait on her manager to bring it. And she says, you need to come to Shanghai. And I said, well, maybe one day we will. And she just kept talking about Shanghai. And she just said it again. She said, did you hear me? You need to come to Shanghai. And she did it like 3 or 4 times. And I finally, you know, sometimes we're dense. I finally, oh, this is God speaking, you know, through this Chinese lady to come. I was being received by a Chinese person, welcomed into a nation. And again, and I was in Germany. Like I said, most of our work's been to the West. And to me, that was a picture of it shifting back here. So we came here in March. And one of the things, Jake, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, if we can. When we came here in March, we do, fortunately for us, Sachio, Jacob's wife, her father's a pastor, and he's been more than generous to open doors for us through his relationships in the nation here, which is really hard for mission groups because this nation is based on relationships. And it's not like America and some other Western cultures where I go places in Europe that they don't even know me, but they welcome me. I mean, literally, they go on the, you know, they just say, come on in, you know, like that. And so here, it's all about relationship, vetting, trusting. And so we were doing some work in southwestern Japan, the prefecture over there in an area called Kumamoto. And we decided last time we felt led to go to Nagasaki. Now, we knew we dropped the bomb there and during the war and all that, and we wanted to repent for anything that Americans did that was not right, etc. Not saying the bomb was wrong. I think God used that to end a war and save a people. But nonetheless, while we were there, we uncovered, and we did uncover so many mysteries about Christianity in this nation and the martyrdom that occurred. That's where Christianity was birthed in Japan, was in that region. And that was this has been one of the major regions we're going to, is that we're going back to the well of salvation, where the gospel started here, and then the persecution started. And basically, what we discovered, we read the horrific stories of the martyrs and those who willingly died, both children, women, everybody that gave their life. It was quite moving, to say the least. And that was kind of a 1600s around there and so forth. It was a sad part of the history, and the gospel, from what we read and understood, kind of migrated to Korea then, and a lot of them, because it's just a short boat ride away, and so Korea embraced the new gospel, but Japan never fully recovered from that. And so we feel like one of our roles here is one, to cry out for the blood of the martyrs to begin to have a voice again. One of the first times I ministered in Kagawa, when I was prophesying over the church, I heard these voices coming from the ground, literally crying out. And I didn't know why. I didn't know why. I just heard it, only to not know the history at that time, but find out the history that the martyrs, their blood is crying out. What tells us in Hebrews. But Jesus' blood cries out a much greater cry. But right now, we hear the cry. And so, Jacob, let's talk a little bit about the martyrdom. You know a little bit more of the history there. Let's talk about what happened, and in our heart to restore that.
Well, I think, well, it's a deep history, but as you said, around the 1600s, the first Jesuit missionaries came to the southwest island of Japan. That's the island that faces, Asia, so it's easy access. So of course that's where they would first land. And so, but it was crazy, even though, we're not Catholic or whatever, and we have a lot of disagreements with that system of Christianity, but it is still the story of Jesus, the gospel. I believe the Lord can use that. And it was crazy because Christianity took that island, that far western island, by storm. It mass conversion. It was revival, I guess you could say. Some areas of some clans were like 70% Christian, and around Nagasaki. Nagasaki was a port that the government would restrict foreign people coming into Japan, but they would let them stay in Nagasaki to kind of contain them, quarantine them from the rest of the nation. And so that became kind of ground zero for Christianity. That area became ground zero for Christianity to spread. But also when the persecution started happening, they started, there, because that's where most of the Christians were, obviously. And what was I saying? So we went to many sites, of course. We went to this one castle or a couple of castles that were actually, I've never seen this before because I've been in the other part of Japan where there's been very little influence of Christianity. But you read the historical, placards and everything, and it says this clan was a Christian clan. This castle was completely staffed and housed by Christians, and the government came and basically killed them all, and it's ruins. And then they destroyed and left it in ruins to this day. And so what ended up happening was Christianity in the West became what they call hidden Christians. That's the literal term that they use in Japanese for it. And so a lot of Christians would practice Christianity but keep it hidden. And that tradition of keeping it hidden is still done to this day, even though there really isn't religious persecution. Except when we were in Kumamoto, they don't physically assault them or anything, but there's still a lot of stigma and a lot of animosity for non-Christians there to Christians, and so they still keep it hidden, even though they don't have fear for their life or anything. They do these things where they put stuff on, the Japanese people in Kumamoto area will put stuff on their houses to say that I'm not a Christian.
Yeah.
Which is really weird because now Christianity is 1%. Very small percentage, but you have an entire culture speaking out against that, basically, giving a lot of attention to this because it's part of the tradition of that area. And that's not, the rest of Japan is not like that at all. But basically what ended up happening, and so one of the that's a sad story that the Christians were persecuted, but one of the big factors that isn't talked about is that because it was Catholicism, the government here, there's, I think, spiritual and demonic things happening in the background as well, but the government here was afraid of Christianity because of political influence, not so much, the religious side of things, because they're syncretic here, like India and other places. Normally, you bring a new religion in and it becomes popular, they kind of, bake it into what they already believe. They don't believe in separating things like we do in America in particular. And so that has actually happened in modern times, but the government was afraid that Rome would take over Japan. The Roman Catholic Church would take over Japan, and all of the decisions and everything, there would be a lot of political interference from Rome, which is a legitimate fear because they did that in Europe. So it's not like they were just being paranoid or anything. They didn't want to be controlled. They didn't want to be colonized like China, like Korea, and so their persecution against Christianity was in response to that. because it wasn't just like the people, it was the leaders. It was like he was the government here was losing control of his people, and so they decided, we're gonna take them out, kill them all, and so they did, and they basically wiped out. It was about what 300,000 Christians
Yeah,
at the time.
yeah,
They
yeah.
basically wiped out Christianity,
Yeah.
and then they closed off the country, and so Christianity wasn't growing at all for until after World War II, from the 1600s till World War II. And so when we talk about the gospel, or rather, the percentage of Christians in Japan, we think that's wow, it's 1%, that's so low. But one of the reasons for that is there hasn't been any opportunity for the gospel to be spread here. Only half a century, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas China, Korea, other nations, hundreds and hundreds of years
Right.
have been allowed. People can come and preach and spread the gospel and all of that. But we haven't had freedom of religion in this nation since after World War II.
Well, I think we went to a place called Amakusa, I think is
Yeah,
where it
Amakusa,
was,
yeah.
and we went to a museum, and I was reading there, and one of the interesting things, what Jacob just brought up was very important. It's very applicable to where we are today. The book of Revelation says the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ. And that was actually happening here. At some level in this nation, the kingdom of God was growing so rapidly, and that's what made the government nervous. Now, they were worried about Rome, but one of the things I read there, these Christians were becoming political leaders. They were winning, I don't know if they had elections, but they were being placed in political positions. They were affecting the education system. They were affecting the business culture. They were affecting the family. Really, the seven mountains, as we call it, were actually being affected here. And I think the political entities of this nation at that time foresaw that if we don't stop this, it's going to take over. And that's the history of the world, isn't it? When Christianity starts moving the way God created it to move, the world, the Antichrist spirit rises up and says, no, we can't have that. That attacks our humanity, our humanism, our culture. And I think if you look at Japan today when we're here, I mean, self is the God, if you want to say that. For me, outsider looking in, because it's about their works, performance, their identity is made by what they do. And the fact is that these people were taking positions of authority. So when it's your God for the position, and now you're losing it to another entity, and it's Christians, on top of that, it had to be stopped as far as an antichrist spirit. So what you saw there was that occurred. So I don't know, I've looked at a lot of cultures, I've studied a lot of history. It's very few times you see what we saw there, what we saw here, I should say. And when we were in Nagasaki, one of the things, the whole team that we brought all sensed it had an open heaven there. We felt like it was one of the freest places we'd been in the spirit as we've traveled the land. We've not traveled the whole land yet, so we're trying to get it. We're paying our price of sowing. I realize in my lifetime I'm not going to see the ultimate fruit here, but I feel like it's a time to build so that another generation can come behind and build this, and that's how we have to build. We believe for the coming of the Lord, but we also build while we're here. So I think that's part of the social, economic, the political, everything in culture was being affected by Christians. And believe me, when they are in charge, they change the whole culture for good, if you ask me. And if they're good Christians, obviously, and I think they were from what we read and what we understand, they're willing to give their lives for the gospel. And that's what happened in that season. So there is blood that's crying out. And we want you to partner with us as you watch these live streams and pray with us here in Asia. Let's believe for that. Let's believe that what they died for would not be in vain, but it would accomplish a seed of hope for the future. And I think that's what we're coming along behind. So we got just a few minutes left. We want to talk. Jacob, let's close with this part about the difference of ministry. I think for me it's a learning curve because the Western ministry that I've been involved in, it works pretty much in all the places I travel because the Western missionaries from America and others have influenced it so greatly, as well as they watch the West. When I'm in, even Eastern Europe and all parts of Germany and so forth, and Africa, etc., they watch American ministries So they kind of see that, and it gives you an open door, yes. But here, that's not the same. The language barrier is huge here. English is spoken most of the world over, but not in the Asian culture. It's just not. They're learning, it's growing, the next generation's learning it. But for the most part, it's not. So they're not watching Western ministries and kind of gaining. There are some, I'm sure, that do. But for the most part, so it's a whole different, I don't call it animal, but it's a different way of ministering. You honor the culture. We believe in that. We do. We don't compromise the gospel ever, but you got to walk that out. Zach, so talk about that. What's your learning curve, Jacob, when you got here versus the Western ministry that you grew up under?
Oh boy, we can talk
Yeah,
hours and hours
I
and hours
realize. I
about this.
realize.
One thing you mentioned about the language barrier here, and I would say though, in certain nations in Asia, like Korea and Philippines for sure, you can get by with English. It's always better to, of course, learn the language of the land because you just get a better connection with people, and you overcome communication barriers even if they do know English. China, I don't know, it's hit or miss. I've met people from China with great English, and some people can't speak a lick of it. But when I just tell people, particularly Japan, because like Korea, if you go there, it's only 2 hours away, but they really, kind of like what he was saying with Eastern Europe, South Korea actually does look up to the West, looks up to America. They want to be like America, so the fashion and everything. Their, pop music industry is really influential right now, and it's because they're mimicking 90s American pop culture, and they're kind of taking it to the next level or whatever. But Japan is very unique because, as I mentioned earlier, it was isolated for such a long time, and that contributes to the language barrier. I mean, the news the other day, every time this report comes out, like who has the best English, and Japan keeps falling in the rankings every year. And the reason for this, Japan is unique, more unique than any other nation in this regard, because here, like other nations, Korea or whatever, if you want to get a good job, you want to be successful in life, you gotta learn English, and it's part of being, the globalization and everything. But in Japan, Japan's wealthy enough and it's big enough and secure enough. You do not have to learn English. You do not have to interact with the outside world. Now, in the long run, I think that's not going to necessarily be the case. But for the time being, especially like in the 80s, 90s, and the aughts, there's no reason to learn English other than if you wanted to go abroad, but most people don't want to. They're very percentage-wise compared to other nations like Korea, China, Philippines, the percentage of Japanese people in foreign nations is very low. Everybody likes this nation, everybody stays here. And I tell people, especially if they're missionaries and they're coming here, moving here, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, this is an alien planet. Like, the way they think is the reverse of the way we think. They left from right, right from left. I don't know like how else I can explain it. Sometimes it's just like, why do you do this? Why are they doing it this way? Over time, you see their logic in it, and you kind of understand where they're coming from and their perspective or whatever. And the reason for this is because they don't have a Judeo-Christian foundation like you'll find in the West and Europe, even in some parts of Africa, South and Central America. You don't have any of the influence, as Pastor Tim talked about. You don't have missionaries coming here over hundreds of years influencing the culture at a subliminal level at all. And so when it comes to morality and all those sorts of things, it's a lot different than what we do. When it comes to idolatry, people still worship idols to this day. You read it, like some of the stuff you read in the Old Testament that people would do, that the Israelites struggled with in Canaan, they're doing that here.
Yeah.
They're giving food offerings. You see, like, food offerings are bad. That's not really a problem we deal with in America, but they do that here. I've given people food as a present, and they've given that to idols, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that. Sorry, Lord, that my contribution went to that. But Japan is also it's unique because it's a fairly wealthy nation. We were talking the other day about some of the mission trips recently Christian Center Shreveport did to Colombia and to the Amazon, and like people, they were building churches and really serving and help supporting the people there. That sort of work really can't be done here because the people here are wealthy in and of themselves, and they're hardworking, and they have no problem doing that sort of work by themselves. And so, if that's the kind of ministry you're used to doing, you go to a third world nation and help support them and do things that they're not able to do, that they can't financially afford to do. You can't really do that here. That happened in 2011 when the tsunami happened and all that damage happened. So many people donated so much money and all of these clothes and everything, and then when I got here, they didn't know what to do with it because they really didn't need it. In a sense, they kind of are good at taking care of themselves here, and so that's why it's important to approach
Yes.
missions here from an apostolic standpoint and teach that model here because they are capable of facilitating the apostolic model. Of course, obviously, you need to teach the gospel and the basic discipleship.
That's right.
But one thing that we see when we go to other nations is in certain places, when you go there, the churches are a lot of the times the leaders are Americans or British people, right? And it's really important. That's something that we believe. It's really important for the local people to rise up, and leaders, in the land wherever you go to rise up and become leaders here. And I think more than more than any other nation in the world, Japan is capable of that.
Yes.
And I don't know if that's really a perspective of a lot of mission.
No, that
comes
helps.
here.
I think when you were saying that, what reminds me of when Peter and John prayed for the man at the gate, beautiful. Silver and gold have we none, but what we have we give unto you. I think that's our role here, is that we're not here to give the silver and gold. Now, I travel to third world countries and we take offerings and we sow, we build, because they don't have that. We do have silver and gold we help them with. But here they need something that we carry, and then also we can learn from them as well. I think that's a cross-pollination, especially when you start working with the church. One of the saddest problems from the war was the hatred between America and Japan. And we feel like we're here to break that barrier and to demonstrate to the Japanese people and the Asian people that we can love regardless of the past history, and also different mindsets. I think that a lot of paradigms are put into the church about what we are as Christians from the West, etc. I know we sent a mission team once to Beijing to work in an orphanage, and the team we sent was helping like mow and wash the windows and all. And next thing you know, there was a whole gathering of a crowd outside watching them do that. And they finally, one of the missionaries went up to the Chinese and said, "What are y'all looking at?" "Well, we heard the Americans don't work. We heard they don't do anything like this, so we're watching to see if that's true." And so it became a testimony that the missionary used to minister to them that we came to serve as Americans and to the Chinese people. And I think for here, our heart is, we're not trying to change the church here. We're not trying to do anything that way. We're just trying to partner with them and come alongside them. And then when you sow to Christian Center, we'll close with this. When you close the Christian Center Shreveport, when you sow, I should say, this is part of it. We sow into this land every month. We sow in as much as we can to build something here, and we want to build that. My goal is to build some fundraising in the next years ahead to be that one thing that Jacob and Sachio, they're living in an old apartment here, and we hope to buy a property where we can have places to train people, a center where we can send mission teams, short-term mission trips, where they can come, get equipped, get trained. And so if that's something on your heart, or you know somebody that has that heart, let us know. You can go to our website, christiancentershreveport.com, and there on the Give button, there's a Asian Mission button there, as well as on our app. You can do that there. We want to thank you for some of you that do that. Some people give every month to the Asian missions, and we so thank you for that. And I know Jacob and Sachio, thank you from the bottom of their heart for that. They're reaping your sowing. I want to say that right now. We believe our giving to them is a seed into the land, because they live here, they work here, they sow into this land, and now they birthed a child here. We have an American and Japanese girl come together and birth a child that's a multicultural child, obviously now, who's in the land. And that part, they have no desire to come back to the West. This is their home. This is where they're called to live, and we're excited about that. It's harder for us as family, but nonetheless, they thank God for airplanes and travel that can all change that. But nonetheless, this is where we are. So pray for us, and I guess Jacob, if you will close us out and just talk about the things that they can pray, and pray for this nation, especially this, since we've been focusing on Japan today. I why don't you give some directives here for that as we close out? So God bless you. Look forward to seeing you this weekend, this Sunday at Christian Center Shreveport. I'll be back in the pulpit and ministering again. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So for praying, one of the big things is, like he mentioned, we want to buy property, and without getting into the weeds of it all, you need certain status, certain permissions from the government. I actually have a letter I got yesterday, correspondence. We're working on that certification and visa, that kind of stuff. So please pray that there will be no obstacles, that all of that stuff that we are pursuing will have favor with the government. And because what we're doing is really unique. We're not like building a church here. And even if you try to do that, that's complicated in of itself. Not going to get into the weeds there. But that's one of the things that you can pray for, favor with the government in the long run, especially when it comes to taxes and everything. Because here you have to have all your ducks in a row. And if you make one mistake, not going to work. So that's one thing. On a spiritual side, obviously, we have, of course, covering when it comes to intercession and all that sort of stuff, but please pray that we're protected. More so from spiritual and emotional things. Japan's a very safe nation. Sometimes you have natural disasters, but when it comes to your physical safety with other people, it is a very safe nation, one of the most safest in the world. A lot of people are fascinated by that. But when people live here, especially spirit-filled Christians, when they live here after a while, they realize the oppression, the emotional oppression and the spiritual oppression is very heavy there. And I would like to think that I'm used to it right now, but I could always use more prayer. Our family, everyone that we're connected with, we can always use more prayer, especially when we do ministry. Satya and I are heavily involved in worship ministry as well with this church and other places. And so warfare happens, especially during certain seasons. There's a lot of demonic activity. They'll literally walk around my neighborhood with altars, false altars to false gods with their festivals that they do here. And we also have this particular neighborhood. We have Muslims here, we have Hindus here, we have, of course, we're Christians, we have Jehovah's Witnesses, we have Mormons, and so everything, it's a big, battle royale of spiritual things going on here. And so protection and guidance, how to navigate all of that is always appreciated. We are, right now, another thing to pray for, we are preparing for our annual March ministry trip here. And of course, we have some open doors that we've had for a while. We have places that we've been sowing, but we feel like there's other regions, other ministries that we feel called to go and, sow seeds into. And so please pray for favor with the people there and the doors that are open there. One of the big things with Japan is time is important. And a lot of missionaries that I've encountered that come to Japan, they'll only be here for 5 years or 10 years, which is not that's a sacrifice. That's a big chunk of your life that you dedicated to the gospel. But to really have roots and build relationships and get favor in the land, you have to be here a lot longer. And so that's part of what I've been here for over 10 years. Pastor Tim and some of the team that have come, they've come for a couple of years in a row, and we have vision to continue doing that, to continue fostering the seeds that have been planted and the relationships that have been created. Because as he said, relationships are very important, but also being consistent, being persistent, really exponentially increases the favor that you have here. And so we just, for all of the finances and all of the like, there's warfare that happens when these guys come over in their lives as well as our lives, and just pray for protection, physical protection, spiritual protection, when the people come and when they go, but also that more doors will open up. Once the door cracks open and you get your foot in and you meet people and you build a relationship with people, it's a lot smoother from that point on. But that first cracking the door open takes a lot sometimes. And so we just pray that, what we're praying for, what the Lord's giving us all direction for, that we would be guided, we would listen, and we would step out and go where we need to go. Like for me, I love this entire nation. I live here in the center west area, but I'm in a big urban area, but we like going to the countryside where there's hardly any people. Because when we come to the countryside here in Japan, they're so blessed. They cannot believe that we would come all the way out to where they are. A lot of the missionary activities centered in the big urban areas where all the people are, which is, necessary, of course. But, the Great Commission says go to the ends of the earth, right? And we literally go to the edge of this nation. There's the ocean and there's just nothing out there as far as you can see. That's kind of places that we've been going to, and that's where we want to continue going to those places that are underserved, that no one ever goes to. And we also want more people to come. We want more resources, want more, just please pray for logistical smoothness, that more people can come, more opportunities can be had. We need translators like crazy. As we were talking about the language barrier earlier, I have my wife and a few other people that can help us, but if we really want to ramp up what we're doing here, we need more, both, people, Americans that can speak Japanese or whatever, or Japanese people that can speak English, whichever way it goes. There's so many things to pray for, but I think that'll keep you occupied for a while. So we thank you for your support and for your love and your prayers. Everything is so much appreciated, and bigger things are coming soon. I'm excited. Please be excited as well. And hopefully we also, we have a baby right now, so it's a little bit difficult, but we hope we are able to travel back to Louisiana, maybe other places. I know lots of people all over the world are watching. Hopefully one day soon I will see you, my wife and my daughter, we can see you in the future and see you face to face, because that's always good as well. So anyway, that is the end of this broadcast. It went a little bit longer than we normally go to, but that's okay. Thank you if you've listened all the way up until this point. Be blessed and have a great weekend. We will see you next time. Goodbye.